leaders, we sometimes try to overplay our successes. I think as humans, we are all vulnerable. And when you are trying to inspire people or lead people, they want to know more about your vulnerabilities. We always make a classic error of speaking much more than what we hear. I would be rather the last person to speak in the room and be very comfortable with it. A lot of people tend to overplay the importance of good projects. There is, in my opinion, no such thing as good project or bad project.
Okay.
There is only the ability for an individual to see through what it has to offer to you and not being able to see what it has offered to you. Multitasking is a bit overrated in my opinion. You just need to compartmentalize your time allocation as opposed to saying that you will do multiple things in that same time. Because what invariably happens is that you start to overvalue or put a lot of emphasis on trying to do 2 or 3 different things. What ends up happening is that you become so unproductive that you end up taking more time in doing those 3 things than what you would have taken, let's say, if you had planned your day properly.
Welcome to another wonderful conversation, we are hoping, with Mr. Sandeep Singh. Sir, I'd like you to introduce yourself to the people who are unaware yet.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you very much for having me here.
Pleasure.
And quick introduction. My name is Sandeep. I am a managing director with Accenture. I've been with Accenture for almost about 17 years now. Prior to that, I did my MBA from IIM Kozhikode. And before that, I did my engineering from IIT Delhi in mechanical engineering. So that's a little bit about my professional experience. And then I am also an author. I'm also a blogger. I'm also a runner. And I tend to do a few more things over and above my work. So that's a bit about me. In terms of my family, I'm a married person. My son is about 14 years old. And I also stay with my parents and my in-laws who are all very close to me. So,
wonderful. That's very unique.
Yeah.
We don't find a lot of people in today's day and age living with that.
So we have 3 houses in Gurgaon.
Yeah. Okay.
And all the 3 houses are within 1 kilometer of each other.
Wonderful.
So it's an equilateral triangle, as I call it. And at the center of that equilateral triangle, we have a Gurudwara, which is very important for my parents and in-laws.
Wow.
So yeah, it's good. Nice little ecosystem we live in.
Wow. Did you plan it to be around the Gurudwara?
These things don't happen accidentally. You have to plan it. It's all by design. So we did all of this during the COVID times. I think the realization sunk in that life is too fickle.
Yeah.
And if something goes wrong, you have to be very close by. So we made all the hassles, we made all the push, and got them all very close by.
Oh, nice. That's a really, that's so great. I mean, I will also plan and do something like that.
Too young for that.
Yeah, too young for that now. But the idea is to stay.
Yeah.
And to just begin with, why I wanted to have you on this podcast someday. I think I mentioned to you that it struck I think a year ago, last year, that when I saw a post that was made around you running 100 half marathons in 100 days. Right, I think it was 2019.
Yes.
And so me and a colleague of mine, we were doing a few runs here and there, 3 kilometers, 4 kilometers at max. Right. So not runners, but we were fascinated together to see somebody do that, especially that someone being a managing director at Accenture, doing so well work-wise, and then out of work doing something so significant to create an impact for or raise awareness for air pollution. So, one, how did that journey of becoming a runner started? And then I would like you to tell me more about the 100 days, 100 half marathons and how that idea started.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, see, this thing happened in 2019, but the running journey started in 2013.
Okay.
So it was like just another day in the office and I was doing somebody's interview. And I typically ask the person at the end of the interview, what are your hobbies? What's about you other than work? So he told me about his marathon passion. He said that I run long distances, like 21 kilometers, 42 kilometers. So I was like quite taken aback because at that time I was a bit heavier than what I look like now.
Yeah.
I was about 92 kgs.
Okay.
So I did not confess it to him, but I was like really psyched out when he told me that he runs 42 kilometers for fun over the weekends. I mean, who does that for fun over the weekends?
Agreed.
So I went back to my house. I told my wife, Japneet, that there are people like us who actually do these kind of stupid things.
Yeah.
So she prompted me. She said, why don't you go out and check out for yourself? How much can you run? So I was always a kind of a sporty guy, but not really a runner. So I thought I'll manage 5K. But I was taken aback. I actually stopped at about 800 meters and I was like breathless. So it started off with that little bit of ego. So I said that I need to improve, and thereafter the journey started. So every night I started to step out for a jog, and then I gave myself a target that if not a full marathon, I want to do a half marathon at least in the near future. Did some googling, figured out it was the month of Jan or Feb, if I remember correctly, and I said that there is an event coming up. It's called Airtel Delhi Half Marathon. At that time, it was ADHM as they commonly called it, and I said I want to participate in that, and let's see where it goes. So I gave myself a target, and from there on the journey started. So yeah, I stepped out every night. That 800 meters became 2 kilometers. It became 4 kilometers. It became 10 kilometers. It kind of saturated after a point, but then I had to do something different to start to improve again. And by the time November came in, I actually did my first half marathon, which was in 1 hour 43 minutes.
This was how far from the day you began?
So this was about 7-8 months into the journey. Took about 8 months from 800 meter stretch to a half a marathon kind of a thing. So that started, and then when I came back home after that half marathon, I realized that last 8 months have been so nicely focused because everything that I was doing was revolving around what makes me a better runner, right? So I suddenly felt a void. I was like, I had committed to something that has happened. Now what? And then I realized that it was not supposed to be like that. It was supposed to be a lifestyle shift. And that's where I realized that this thing is going to stay with me forever now. Then I started searching up which is the next event coming up because I wanted that same level of focus. So what turned out was that there is this Standard Chartered Mumbai Marathon which was happening in the month of Jan, about 2 to 3 months away from that time. I started to register for that, and I realized that the half marathon seats had already been booked out. So only the full marathon seats were left. So I didn't know what would it take to reach from 21 to 42, but I said if that is the only option, let's go for it. And it's not a simple mathematical extrapolation that if you can do a 21, you can do a 42. Just linearly extrapolate that. It doesn't work like that. A lot changes after you have crossed the 30-kilometer mark, which I did not know because I had never gone beyond 21. So I being an ignorant in that space, I just signed up for it, and I showed up on the race day, 42 kilometers. When I was running the Standard Chartered Mumbai Marathon, I realized that there are body parts that I was not aware of. I'll not be exaggerating if I tell you that even my earlobes were paining. So, so I realized that it's no fun showing up like that unprepared. But then you get the experience. You want to do better. So over a period of time, I became a better marathoner, and then I realized that I want to do a little more in terms of getting faster, getting bolder. So I gave myself a timing target. I said I want to do a half marathon in 1 hour 30 minutes, which I'm not sure if you're aware. 1 hour 30 minutes is like usually a benchmark. If you can cross that, it's a good kind of a threshold to be on the other side of. That took me about 3 years. I kept hitting 1 hour 32 minutes, 1 hour 33 minutes for a while. Shaving off those last 2-3 minutes took me about 3 years. So there is a law of diminishing returns as well when you're running, right? So I reached 129 in about 2016 or something. As it stands today, my personal best is 1 hour 25 minutes for a half and 3 or 4 minutes for a full marathon. Coming to your 100 half marathons, now that again was a big decision. And sometimes those kind of big decisions are not taken in a very structured way. So you'll be actually surprised. Prior to those 100 half marathons, I had never gone beyond 2 half marathons in consecutive days. I had never done 3 half marathons in 3 consecutive days. So I don't know what struck me, but we were actually at a red light. That red light was showing something like 120 seconds. So usually, it was fairly a longish kind of a red light. I was sitting with my wife, and I just casually told her that from tomorrow onwards, I'm running 100 half marathons in 100 days. That was, I think, 4th of March. Yes, 4th of March.
Damn.
5th of March, the journey started. 12th of June, it ended. And I can't even begin to describe how painful it was because when you make an announcement like that, I made a classical mistake of putting it on social media that I'm going to be doing 100 half marathons in 100 days, and that's for a cause. I'm going to create awareness about air pollution. I called it a Right to Breathe campaign. So initially there was a lot of excitement. There was a lot of euphoria. Everybody was supporting me, But then after 7 or 8 days, that euphoria settled down. Everybody got back to their space, but I had a long task ahead of me because I had to continue for another 90 days like that. And with each passing day, you realize that the fatigue starts to build up, and it just starts to accumulate over time. And every day was an uncharted territory for me. As I said, I had never gone beyond 2 or 3 consecutive half marathons. By the time I reached 50, I had already started entertaining thoughts of actually quitting it midway, which was never going to be easy. So I just kept reminding myself, just take it one day at a time. Just show up the next day. take it how it goes, and then we'll, if we survive, we'll think about the next day. Let's not think too far ahead. So that's how it was. I realized that there is a lot of power in decomposing things into smaller, manageable components. So what I mean by that is running 100 half marathons in 100 days by itself is a huge humongous task,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
If you start to think about that, you will get overwhelmed. But if you start to tell yourself that I don't care about the 100 half marathons, all I care for is about, let's say, the next 5. That's all I care for. Uske baad we will see. Jo hoga uske baad dekhenge. But let me just focus on the next 5. It becomes very simple. You can actually, the human mind is very gullible. You can actually fool yourself into believing things which you actually benefit from. Even when you are doing a half marathon, forget about the next 5. When you are into the half marathon, for somebody who might not have done a lot of long distance runs, you can feel like 21 kilometers can be overwhelming. But you can decompose that. You can tell yourself that I'm just going to run 5K. 5K feels easy. So rather than doing a complex 21K, let me do that easy task 4 times and then 1 more kilometer. So I learned a lot of nuances of how human mind operates and how you can actually control it and make it believe things that you wanted to believe and then operate accordingly. So it was a journey. 12th of June happened and I was glad that it came to an end. But yeah.
I can only be I can only just keep thinking on how hard it must have been on the body. And as you said, right, after 50 days you felt that you wanted to call it off maybe, but you didn't call it off. Why didn't you call it off?
See, I thought that if I had to call it off, the mental, I'll not call it trauma because that's a very strong word, but that pain or the disappointment of not being able to finish what I had started off would be far more, both
Than
in
the
terms of
actual-
duration and the intensity, as compared to what it would take for me to go through those 50 next days. Right? Those 50 days would have gone by. I mean, 1.5 months is not a lot. But that disappointment of not being able to complete what I had started would have stayed with me for the rest of my life. Right? So when you compare 45 days of discomfort with the rest of your life, kind of a discomfort, physical versus mental, I chose the former. I mean, both the options were not very rosy, but I thought the former was a better option as compared to living with it for the rest of my life. And I didn't feel like it will happen, or it could have gone either way. In hindsight, it's easy for me to almost play the heroic card and say that I decided, I went with it. But the reality is, at that point in time, I did not know, because by the time I was on the 65th day, my feet had swollen so much because of the fatigue that even the shoe would not go up. So I had to first buy a bigger size shoe just so that it would go up. And then there were also a few days when I had to run barefoot because nothing would go up. It had become that swollen. So I didn't know that whether it will come to an end the way I wanted it to. But I didn't want to land in a situation where I will tell myself that tomorrow I'm not going to show up. I told myself that I'll show up for sure. Possibly, if the fatigue takes the better of me, I'll just collapse on the road and somebody will bring me back home, which is okay. But I'm not going to make peace with the fact that tomorrow I'm not showing up. That was unacceptable to me. So I think you always, as a human, you always have a few choices, right? At that point in time, as I said, I had two choices, this and this. I chose that because I felt that was less discomfort.
I mean, I can keep saying stuff, but it's super inspiring just to hear. I don't know, but it's for people, myself and for people who are listening, I think what I take away from your journey, the running journey that we've talked about, is one, you've taken leaps of faith without getting into too much nitty-gritties of that particular decision कि ये कैसे pan out होगा. But एक वो शायद यूरेका moment या लगे हो कि let's do this, and you've done that, and then that hustle or that mindset of not quitting, or at least showing up each day, breaking that down, deconstructing it into small goals has really helped you. And then now in hindsight, when I think about it, don't you think then this is a good idea if say I want to start say 30-day run for myself, or say anybody wants to say take on a journey, then don't you think, since putting it on social media creates a certain pressure on you, because in case you would have not maybe put it on social media, then I believe, although not saying that you might have quit, but there's an external social pressure also now on you.
Yeah.
Ki yaar Sandeep is on 100-day run. Now people are looking at you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Although doesn't really matter a lot in people's lives, but for yourself, you know that people are looking at you. So
Yeah.
don't you think in hindsight then that was a good decision of probably posting it on social media?
I think so. I think when you are trying to do something not enormous, but yeah, something out of the way like that, it helps to create an environment, an ecosystem around you, which pushes you in that direction. So, sometimes when I was running and preparing for a full marathon, right, I was going to go the distance and I was training myself to reach 42 kilometers. Typically, I noticed that since these were solo runs and training runs, inconsequential runs, nobody was observing, nothing. I would have a tendency to stop at 25-ish or 26-ish, right? So, because I was running in a circular loop. So, I said that I want to create an environment which doesn't allow me the luxury of stopping at 26. So, what I started doing was I started running on the GFR road. So, I'll make sure that if the plan for the day is to run 36 kilometers, I'll go linearly to 18 kilometers and then take a U-turn. Up till 18 kilometers, my body was used to going all the way. And I would never carry a wallet or a mobile with me. So, there were no resources for me to book a cab or do anything like that kind of fancy stuff. So, I'll go to the 18th kilometer and then I have to get back home. You either run or walk or jog or whatever, but now you are by yourself. So sometimes it helps. Consciously create an environment which nudges you in that direction, especially if what you're trying to do is not so easy.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Agreed. I actually one thing that now strikes, जो मुझे भी शायद दोबारा से करनी चाहिए. मैंने एक episode किया था. I read about behavioral economics, and as you talk about nudging yourself, right? So there was a significant period of time जब मैंने follow किया. So I was doing martial arts I did for couple 2-3 months, right? So post work I used to go there, and then I had created a loop for myself ki when I used to come after work to home, I was like abhi nahi, can't really go now, too exhausted, right?
Yeah.
But then I started to in the morning keep my sportswear on my bed, ready, my shoes ready, so that when I'm home, I know that I've done a little effort to go to the martial arts class today, because I've prepared in advance कि अब कपड़े तो सामने पड़े हैं.
Correct.
So let's just take one more step.
Correct.
And wear these and go. And one another thing I have implemented that in. So I use Snapchat. So on Snapchat we are essentially sharing an image with our friends each day, and that continuity has to stay. So there's a particular snap streak that continues, that you've been sharing an image with this person for X amount of days. So to incorporate my book reading habit, as I was telling you, what I've done is every day I complete my reading, whatever, either I read 2 pages or I read 10 pages. I click a picture and say day 38 pe hu main abhi, and send a tick mark. So now whenever I have a conversation with people, they're like ki tu ab kaun si book pad raha hai? Yeah, it's good that you're going.
Correct.
And I think a lot of people must have then, of course, been inspired. But do you also know of people who came back to you, told you that, because they saw you do something huge, they also went into, say, a particular journey of their own in some stance?
Quite a few, actually. Quite a few. And those journeys are of different types. There were a few who came back to me and told me that they had embraced a few lifestyle changes. They talked about things like changing their dietary habits. They talked about changing their lifestyle, cutting out junk food. They also talked about the actual objective of the run, what I did, which was for air pollution. So they started taking a few things differently in terms of how would they would do carpooling and all of those kind of lifestyle shifts that they were embracing. So it was very heartening to see that people are noticing and they are actually making some changes. So it's not like going down the drain. It's creating a small ripple effect, and sometimes that is all you need. You don't need to be changing millions of people. All you need to do is just initiate a chain. You influence 10 people, those 10 people influence 10 more people, and it's an exponential expansion thereafter. Within 7 links of connectivity, you are talking about almost a million or a billion kind of people getting impacted. So the trick lies in initiating a chain, and I saw that chain initiated.
Wonderful.
Even yesterday, I was telling you that, obviously this is very far from those 100 days half marathons. But my wife and my son showed up for a 5-kilometer run. I was very happy. They have made a start. Just make the start. Just show up, and the journey will thereafter take care of itself.
And to know that you had a role to play in that, and especially your family imbibing something that you love so much is, I don't know, would be so much heartening. And
it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
Glad to know. How was the run, by the way, yesterday?
So yes, it was fun. My wife finished her first timed 5 kilometer run.
Wonderful.
Her name is Japneet, as I said.
Yeah, yeah.
Ekam, my son, he also finished his first this thing 5 kilometer run.
Hmm.
So that was great.
Hmm.
I did my 10 kilometer. I was like कि अब मैं जा रहा हूँ तो 5 kilometer तो बहुत कम हो जाएगा मेरे लिए. So I'll do a 10k.
Yeah.
And in any case, I did my 10k faster than their 5k. So
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
I
given they were
I
first.
actually won the first position in my age category.
Oh,
In the
wonderful.
40 to 60 age category,
Wonderful.
I won the race.
Wonderful.
So we had about 375 runners in my age category. I stood first. So it was good. It was a special day, and that podium finish made it a bit more special. So yeah.
Crazy, crazy. Did you have a picture also? Do they have a?
Oh, a lot of those.
Really?
Yeah.
Great. I'll have a look at these post the conversation.
They are already on LinkedIn and social media, all kinds of
Acha,
social media.
wonderful.
So while I was commuting here, I was just putting it out there.
Fantastic, fantastic. And now probably initiating the conversation towards, all of us have learned that you've been a runner now, right? And being someone who's a consulting leader, who's leading practice at the firm, I can only imagine how time consuming or the spectrum of responsibilities you might have, right? So now I would like to probably understand from you that as people who are, growing in their careers, why or how important is it to say cultivate certain hobbies alongside that, and how do you end up managing that? Because even from my personal experience, I'm telling you, it's been tough, say managing wanting the podcast to go well, or even wanting to continue in whatever fitness activities I am doing because of work. So how do you manage that, right? And secondly, we could talk about the importance of having a hobby.
Sure. So see, when it comes to managing things, I think first thing to be told is that there are only 24 hours in a day. You cannot create the 25th hour. No matter what you try, you can't do that.
Yeah.
So the idea is that you become consciously aware of the fact that every minute that you're spending on anything can actually be spent on 5 other things. You might as well make sure that that one thing that you're spending your time on, it is worth its time. And second, you are in that moment. A lot of times what happens is that you are here and you're thinking about something else that just brings down the productivity. So I'm very particular about how I use my time. It is all about time management. You have to have a plan right at the beginning of the day. I have a very clear view of from what time to what time, what keeps me busy. So there is a time when I am checking my emails. During that time, if somebody calls me for some office work, I'll probably not entertain that. I'll be like, I have my own agenda for right now, right? So when I'm with somebody else, I'll just make sure that this is what keeps me busy. When I'm working out, I'll not take client calls also, because that's the time I have earmarked. There are exceptions, but that's the time I have earmarked for my fitness. There is time when I have planned for my family. So the point is that you would want to do so much: family, friends, health, happiness, work, clients, people, socialization, all of that. If you don't make the most of every minute that you have, you will soon be, all over the place. So I think this is one thing that I have cultivated in a big way, that I'm actually consciously evaluating that am I in that moment? That is number one. And is this moment worth my time? I have made conscious calls. I have been on some calls where I feel like I'm not adding value because I'm just being a listener, which is not adding much value. So it's okay for me to be not on this call. I'll excuse myself from that. So there are times when I'm, in the workout mode and I'm doing my gym and all. I realize that something else is occupying me. If there is some big steer co coming up or some big client meeting coming up. So then I have to ask myself if this is the right use of your time. If you are so preoccupied, then you might not be here. And if you are here, then be here. And when I say be here, I don't mean physically, I mean mentally. Mentally you have to be in that moment. So that is number one. Second, nobody is a superhero. So forget about that concept of multitasking. In the truest sense of multitasking, there is absolutely no possibility of anybody multitasking, because the mind can only focus on one thing at a time, right? So you cannot be saying that while I am on my client calls, I can be thinking about something else. That multitasking is a bit overrated in my opinion. You just need to compartmentalize your time allocation as compared to saying as opposed to saying that you will do multiple things in that same time, because what invariably happens is that you start to overvalue or put a lot of emphasis on trying to do 2 or 3 different things. what ends up happening is that you become so unproductive that you end up taking more time in doing those three things than what you would have taken, let's say, if you had planned your day properly. So it's all about time management, I guess. You know, that's one.
So point is to be as much as in control of your day, and then again re-evaluating. As you said that if you're working out, that was an interesting aspect, because when you started explaining, I thought that okay, this means that you're in control of your day, you plan your day. But this is a new insight, that even if you've planned your day and say you're working out,
Be flexible. Be flexible. Don't push yourself beyond a point where you are becoming your own liability. You know, you can't be imposing yourself on yourself. So you are a human being, you are not a robot, and the context that you operate in is very dynamic, is very fluid. You know, so make the most of your time and be okay if at times you have to make some exceptions. But the point is that you have to be mindful of what you are doing at every point in time. That's the key for me. If that doesn't happen, then before you know things start to fall apart. So.
Yeah, makes sense. So that is a point to.
And what I also feel is like a lot of times people are not even aware of where the time is leaking out. And I say the word leaking out. You know, sometimes somebody will stop you on the way and they'll be like, do you have a minute for a chat? First of all, when somebody approaches you, nobody takes a minute for a chat. That minute for a chat request invariably becomes 25 minutes or 20 minutes. So when people have approached me with that kind of a thing, do you have a minute? I tell them that I have a minute, but a minute only has 60 seconds. Are you sure you just need a minute? Because if you need more than that, then I don't think I have that time, Abhi. It's okay. There is no offense, and I'm not saying it in a negative way.
Yeah.
All I'm trying to tell you is that I have some plan for the day. In that plan, if you tell me to squeeze in 60 seconds for you, I can. But if you are getting into my plan on the garb of 60 seconds, hoping that I'm going to give you 10 minutes, then probably that's not going to happen. So it's okay to say a no. You have to, be very comfortable with the idea of saying a no. A lot of times people struggle to say a no.
Yeah.
And that eats into their day. A lot of times we struggle to take control of our mind. What happens is that you just take a little bit of a break from something. You open your mobile, you start to look at a reel, and before you know, you have seen 2 reels and then 10 reels and then 25 reels, and that is all unproductive.
Yeah.
So when I was telling you that consciously be aware of every minute, that's what I meant. That keep evaluating yourself. I mean, not in a way that you become like a thinking robot. You're always evaluating, but just being aware that if something is not creating any value or something is not adding into your personality or your productivity, just check it out. And then sometimes what happens also is that you become so aware of it that you can then plan to create that ecosystem the way we were talking about it. If evening time is a time when or sleeping time is a time when you have that habit of getting into the reels, keep your mobile away. Create that environment where you have to get up and go to a different room to check your mobile. If that's what you're trying to get away from. If there are a few friends who tend to eat into your time more than what they should be, then figure out a way of staying away from them. So all these are hacks, tricks of the trade to become masters of your own time.
And masters of your own life or destiny.
Yeah.
In the longer run. Fab. So the point I take away is being mindful always.
Being mindful.
That you're using your time well, and are you in that moment happy with that decision of doing what you're doing?
Yeah.
If not, then probably do what you're too preoccupied about.
Yeah.
Right. And now when I sit across the table from you, there's a sense of sitting across someone who has a whole personality around himself, right? There are a lot of as we're talking about also, right? I am in a certain sense in awe of the multifaceted human being that you are. And as I mentioned earlier, becoming a leader, not say just the designation, but becoming a leader as you've become and inspired people in not just your workplace but in a lot of other places, again helps me come to the question of all of us thinking about cultivating certain habits that also make us well-rounded individuals. Because even if we talk about growing in the workplace, I think, and you could help me understand better, that plays an impact of its own.
Yeah. You see, take a step back. Humans were never meant to be working the way we work.
Yeah.
When the human race was created, we were supposed to be animals who were supposed to be jumping around the trees and running around, moving around, reproducing, doing all those kind of things. Over time, the evolution has taken a toll on ourselves,
Yeah.
and we have landed in a space where sometimes, if we are not conscious about it again, we just become like a robot who is doing something very specific, executing some tasks, executing some instructions through the day, and that kills the human nature inside you. That kills the personality that you were supposed to be. Humans by nature were supposed to be, people who would experiment, who would do things for the joy of doing things. Not everything needs to have a purpose. We sometimes overvalue purpose. Why? Sometimes you just need to be on the field, just running around. People ask me, why do you run? Honestly, 12 years and running, and I still don't know why do I run. I cannot give you an answer. Why do I run? I can create an answer, sounding intelligent sounding answer, but honestly, I don't know why I run, and I don't care, because that gives me joy. Just being on my feet, running around, it's a feeling which is very different. So what I believe is that, to coming to your point, that how are hobbies important, or how is it like a multifaceted personality
Yeah.
is better. I feel like if you don't have anything else to look forward to, you are just operating in a space where it doesn't matter to you if you are productive or not. I've seen that change myself. Before I started running, it wouldn't matter to me if I'm being productive. If something which can be done in 1 hour is happening in 1.5 hours or 2 hours, I'm okay, because I have nothing else to do. शाम को 7 बजे की जगह 9 बजे free हो जाऊंगा. So what? And you become like a dull personality. You become a less productive version of yourself. And the joy starts to go missing a little bit, right? That feeling of experimenting, that feeling of just exploring new things goes missing, and that kills you. Before you actually die down, you actually kill yourself. That's not life. That's just a rut. That's just a simple mechanical way of operating. Life is supposed to be lived and experienced, and that can only happen if you try out new things. So, for example, I have tried out authoring, I have tried out running, I have tried out swimming, I have tried out a lot of new things, and it's playing on my mind that I need to now try a piano. Not that I have any background in music, but I just feel like it would be good. And that gives me a lot of joy. I'm already thinking about ways of creating the time in my day where I can start to bring a piano in my home and start to do something. My wife is a big fan of dancing. She just loves dancing.
Wow.
And she wants me to join her for classes. And I'm very happy with that. I mean, why not? Dancing to the beats and just moving, you're shaking your body.
Yeah.
That is life. Just creating deliverables and meeting timelines is not life. That's a part of life. That's not life. So not that I'm undervaluing that.
Yeah.
I value that, because if I don't, I wouldn't have reached in my professional career where I am right now. But I'm also saying that that is not all. There is much more to it. So do that, give it its full respect, and then make sure that you also respect what you were supposed to be, which was a lot more than just a person who would be professionally sound and doing deliverables and meeting timelines. There is much more to it. And then I feel like it also creates a little bit of positive impact which starts to rub on the other things.
Sure.
So the time I started running, from there on, the way I was operating in my official requirements, professional ambience, was actually more efficient. I became more diligent. I would show up on time for every single meeting. What might have earlier been a 2 to 3 minutes delay would invariably be on the spot kind of a time start for any meeting. What sometimes happened to be a case of things taking a little longer than what they could have would always happen on time. So when you start to do these multiple things and start to enjoy and start to live life, you become the best version of yourself, and it starts to show up in every aspect. So it's that that positivity which rubs and starts to kind of have a virtuous cycle.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Fantastic. So that essentially you're a constant learner, as we were earlier talking about, that despite whatever you're learning, whatever new you're curious about, but the whole idea of being a constant learner and putting your hand into different things just for the sake of it, without any purpose, as you said earlier, like not overvaluing purpose in a lot of aspects, and just doing things for the sake of doing things and having fun, right? And now I think I was supposed to I was thinking about a different question, but a personal problem, if I might ask your suggestion on. Given that you've been post that you started running, you've been entering meetings on time. I am someone who's been struggling as much. I try to. I fail a lot with being on time, despite understanding that there are significant things that are very important. Until and unless something has a visibly significant negative impact on me, I am usually not on time, and I'm not happy about that. So, being somebody who has understood that importance, what suggestion would you say give me, or say people who like me struggling with being on time?
I think it's all about planning. It's
Hmm.
all about planning. Sometimes you don't plan for small things. For example, if there is a meeting at 1:30, we would plan to be there at 1:30.
Yeah.
And in the process, we don't plan for the fact that when I get out of the cab, there is a lift to be taken,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you might just end up meeting somebody, and there is a chit chat on the way, and
yeah.
those small things. So the point is that if there is something that you have at 1:30, you'll rather plan it in a way that you be there at 1:20.
Hmm.
So a lot of times those small things add up, which start to
Hmm.
show up in the form of you getting delayed by 10 minutes,
Yeah.
which never reflects good on you.
Yeah.
So again, goes back to that same point, being consciously aware of what you value,
Hmm.
and then what would it take for you to be able to deliver on that.
Hmm.
It's all about that, being consciously aware, being mindful, being deliberate.
Hmm.
All of those small things might sound like a sweet talk, right? But it actually has a lot of value.
Hmm.
And I'll also add, you talked about purpose. We talked about purpose. Purpose, in my opinion, is something which is overvalued. A lot of people create a lot of hype in talking
Purpose.
about what's my purpose in life. There is no purpose in life, yaar. I mean, let's get it straight.
Hmm.
We are as inconsequential as one could ever imagine.
True.
Yeah, think of the universe in the larger scheme of things. You're talking about God alone knows infinity in
Yeah.
time and space,
Yeah.
right? There is
Yeah.
no starting point, there is no ending point
Yeah.
in time, there is no edge, there is no starting point in terms of space.
Hmm.
It's infinity,
Hmm.
and in that infinity you are a speck,
Hmm.
a firefly in the night kind of a thing.
Hmm.
What purpose are we talking about? So sometimes we as humans tend to overcomplicate things. We start to search for things which don't exist,
Hmm.
and in the process we create
Hmm.
hurdles in our own head,
Hmm.
which kind of bind you, which constrain you,
Hmm.
and that kind of prevents you from living the life the way it was supposed to be lived.
Hmm.
So yeah, take it easy. Just look out for experiences. Just try to be happy.
Hmm.
That's the purpose. For me, if you ask me what's the purpose, my purpose is being happy.
Hmm.
I don't care for any other purpose. I'm not somebody who's going to have a lasting impact on the universe.
Hmm.
I might have a little bit of an impact on a few individuals around me, but they themselves such a small part of the whole universe that let's keep it simple.
बात तो सही है. बात तो सही है. हम सही में कभी कभी मैं खुद ही मतलब एज आई टेक अ पॉज एंड थिंक अबाउट इट, राइट, इवन आई टेंड टू सुपर कॉम्प्लिकेट certain decisions in my life, and yeah, the point is to be in that balance and keeping it simple.
Keep it
ताकि-
simple.
Hmm.
Life is very simple actually.
Hmm.
We strain it with a lot of things.
Yeah.
If you're trying to start something new, we'll keep waiting for the right moment.
Yeah.
When we start that thing at the right moment, we will cover it under the package of New Year resolution.
Yeah.
ऐसे थोड़ी होता है.
Hmm.
अगर कुछ करना है, then why would you need to wait for the New Year resolution?
Yeah.
That is just a classic way of telling yourself कि you are not going to sustain it. So life is actually very simple. कुछ करना है तो do it here and now. Don't wait for the right moment. And if you have done something, then don't regret.
Hmm.
You are making choices based on what you see and observe around you. उसके बाद never have any regrets.
Hmm.
Never have that sympathy for yourself. Never feel pity about yourself. A lot of people play that sympathy card or the pity card, loser card. They almost derive some pleasure when things don't go their way.
Yeah.
They actually derive pleasure in projecting themselves as a victim of circumstances.
Hmm.
Such a waste of time, right? Such a waste of time. Something happened because of which I had started a startup and COVID happened and उसके बाद सब close हो गया. तो क्या करें यार? हो गया तो हो गया.
हो गया.
Seriously, right? Never play that victim card.
Hmm.
It's the biggest waste of time.
Hmm.
You might feel that the other person is giving you sympathy. Other person is waiting कि यार रोना बंद कर. I have better things to do.
Yeah.
Right? So I might be sounding very aggressive in this in the way I'm saying this, but the point is that I have seen people wasting their time.
Hmm.
I didn't get promoted because the recession came at the wrong time.
Hmm.
So अब क्या करें भाई? अगर रिसेशन आ गया, उसके वजह से स्लॉट्स कट गए,
Hmm.
जिसकी वजह से आप प्रमोट नहीं हुए, देन व्हाट आर यू एक्सपेक्टिंग आउट ऑफ मी? गेट ऑन विद इट. सिंपल. कुछ फर्क भी नहीं पड़ेगा यार. अभी आज प्रमोट होना था तो 1 साल बाद प्रमोट हो जाएगा. लाइफ इज गोइंग टू हैपन द वे इट इज सपोज टू हैपन. उसमें यू क्रिएट सच अ बिग हाइप अराउंड योर सेल्फ दैट एज इफ द होल वर्ल्ड हैज टू कंस्पायर टू मेक यू डू एंड मीट योर पर्सनल गोल्स. ऐसे नहीं है ना. Life is going to happen in the way life is supposed to happen. Some things will work for you, some things will not work for you. When they don't work for you, don't create a such a big fuss about it. So and I'm being very honest about this. A lot of people actually derive pleasure by talking about circumstances which led to their downfall.
I agree.
And I don't know, I'm sure there is some kind of a hormonal release or something that happens in the mind which makes the human feel better by talking about those things, but in my opinion it's the sheer waste of time.
Point taken. Point taken. And again, with the learning for all of us is to be again mindful of not just the time, but of what is in our control.
Yeah.
And what is not.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So let's focus on what
if it is in your locus of control,
then do
change
something
it.
about it.
If it is not, move on. Those are the only two options. Right? There is no third thing. अगर कुछ कर सकते हो उसके बारे में तो कर दो. नहीं कर सकते तो आगे बढ़ जाओ. उसके बारे में क्रिप मत मारो. Don't crib about it. That won't change things.
5 मिनट 10 मिनट 15 मिनट बुरा फील कर लो, but
that's okay.
let's
you
get
can
back
feel
to
bad.
what
You're
you can do.
human. After all, you're a human. But don't create a bigger hole for yourself by spending 5 weeks on that
Thinking about it.
and giving yourself a month to come out of it. Move on. अगर कुछ कर सकते तो कर लो. I'm not saying that you accept things the way they are. Ask yourself very objectively, can I do something about it? If the answer is yes, then do it. If the answer is no, then don't do it and move on. If the answer is maybe, then ask yourself, what would it take for that maybe to shift towards a no or a yes? Sometimes the answers are not yes or no, right? The life is not as black and white as that. The answers are maybe. Then ask yourself very objectively that what would it take? I mean, do I need some resources? Do I need some coaching? Do I need some guidance? Do I need some help? Do I need... It's okay. Ask for help. अगर help मांग के बात बनती है, then ask for help. But don't crib about it. It's okay to be vulnerable at times. But move on उसके बाद.
हाँ, जितना objectively handle कर सकते हैं
जितना objectively handle कर सकते हो.
Makes sense. Now, I will be very intrigued to know what a day in your life looks like, starting from the mornings and then you're at work. Again, I can only imagine the spectrum of responsibilities that you're handling, and being a leader in leading sustainability for a firm, right? What does that encompass? And again, how is your day looking like? A typical day.
So typical day starts at 6 a.m. I'll get up. My son goes to school at about 7. So the first hour of the day is spent with him, dressing him up and having a chit chat and planning his school and all of that kind of usual stuff. 7ish is when he leaves, and thereafter the day starts for me. Typically, I would go to office thereafter. By around 8 or 8:30, I'll be in office. I make it a point to not look at my emails before I have done what I want to do.
Okay.
So there is always a temptation to look at what all has come through in the emails. And the moment you do that, sometimes you just get pulled into it. And you end up starting your day on a note where you had planned to be doing something different. So I make it a point that I don't look at my emails till about 11. The first few hours of the day would be spent on things which are most critical for me. Everybody has an agenda, right? So sometimes my agenda will intertwine with your agenda, which is great if it does. If it doesn't, then I have my own agenda. I won't let you tweak my agenda for what is a higher priority for you. So typically around 8:30 to 11 is when I'll be doing the work that I have planned for.
Okay.
It could mean some kind of a review. It could mean some kind of a QA. It could even mean some kind of a team huddle. It could mean some kind of a feedback session. It could mean multiple things. It could be a client conversation. But whatever it is, I'll have a very clear view of that before I get into the office. At around 11ish, I spent about an hour just clearing all my emails, which is to say that during that 1 hour, you will my colleagues know that this is the time when he's checking his emails. So a lot of them will be getting some replies, and it just goes tuck because I feel like you have to take control of this email traffic as well, because if you do one email and then get into work and then another email and then another call, it just breaks the flow. The momentum never builds up. So I like to compartmentalize things that way. even when I have to do interviews or calls or things, I tell my executive assistant, my EA, that plan for those calls back to back. I don't want a call happening at 2 to 2:30 and then there is another call at 3 to 5 and then there is another call at 5:30. उस आधे घंटे में क्या करूँगा मैं बीच में? There is always a ramp up and then a slow down before I get into the next thing. So just package them, just compress them, and make me do things in those kind of compartments. By around 6ish, 7ish, I would be typically done with the major part of the day. Being in an MNC where you are also working at times with your European clients or North American clients, the day never naturally ends, right? So there would be times when I have to take some calls at even 9:30 or 10 or something like that. There again, coming back to the fitness part of it, I have put a block on my calendar. Right at the beginning of the day or beginning of the week, I'll put a block at my calendar looking at what all I have planned for that week. On your Outlook calendar, on my Outlook calendar, you will also see a block in the form of running time or gym time or family time. So
nice.
You have to actually put it into your calendar.
Nice.
Because then that slot is occupied for yourself. Nobody else can occupy that slot. And you have to respect it. Of course, I'm not saying that be rigid about it. You have to be flexible, but at least you're making an attempt to plan. And I think like if you're planning it that way, you are able to meet it 80-90% of the times. And then 10ish is when the day ends. And then during the time, I would have also, in the evening, I spent some time with my son. He loves playing cricket, especially inside the house when you have the luxury of breaking things and glasses around. So I do that with him. He has picked up this habit of playing chess, as I shared with you. He spends a lot of time training. So I'm not an expert in chess. I mean, I just know the usual moves and all. So he has far outpaced me now in terms of his own journey. But I like to listen to him. He talks very passionately about chess. So all of that stuff happens. And then if it happens to be a long day where you haven't been able to make time for your personal, ambitions, personal aspirations, then I also find it okay to step out for a run late in the night. Sometimes I do that as well. At least 1 or 2 days in a week will always be the days when I run at about 11 p.m. at night or even well past midnight at times. So, plan it as much as you can. At the same time, be fluid and be flexible, depending on how the day is shaping up. But yeah, if you were to ask me to summarize this in a nutshell, basically a day comprises of a few hours of family time, 8 to 9 hours of team time, email time, clients time, analytics time, review time, deliverable time, a little bit of running time, a little bit of gym time, and it's all interspersed. Sometimes things move forward or backward, but I try to do all of that in a day.
And you must feel, I think that people will be very respectful of that somebody's, for say people who you're supposed to engage with, right? Be it counterparts in maybe North America, Europe, when they see that there are, certain times that this person has blocked in advance for something that he wishes to do. I think people will respect that a lot and be mindful of that.
They respect that. Absolutely respect that. And you have to make time for everything. So sometimes you plan for your calls to show up on your Outlook calendar, but you don't plan for your other commitments to actually show up on your Outlook calendar, which starts to almost eat into your day. Right? So if a review has to happen, you have to ask yourself, how much time do I need for this review? If you need 1 hour, it's okay to block your own time for that 1 hour and then make sure that it starts at that time and ends at that time. So goes back to that planning. And you are right. I mean, you don't come across as a rigid person. You only come across as somebody who is very organized and is trying to manage multiple commitments in a way where it starts to make sense. So, you have to take the ownership. At the end of the day, you have to take the ownership of your own agenda in a way that you are able to meet all your commitments. And commitments will be addressed towards multiple types of people, right? Your family, friends, clients, stakeholders, whatnot. But ownership has to be with you. If you dance to their tunes, every time somebody calls you at the drop of a hat, you get into that direction, then you are directionless. Take control of your direction and be okay with the fact that at times, despite your best efforts and planning, you might not be able to do everything, which is also okay. So,
fair point. Now, if we could probably take the conversation in a direction of your professional expertise, which is ESG or sustainability that you're leading. We all talk about corporate social responsibility, right? When I was looking through your LinkedIn, I saw you mentioned looking at corporate social responsibility as corporate social opportunity.
Hmm.
So now a simple question that pops into my mind, or even when I discuss with people, is that sustainability, if or being environmentally compliant, would sound to a layman or anybody who is not an expert as a cost or as a tax, because you have to be wary of something, and it doesn't sound to be an opportunity prima facie, right? So how or what do you mean when you say corporate social opportunity? And there's a further question that I have, is that why is it in economic interest of any organization to be environmentally responsible or compliant?
Okay. So I think at the heart of this, the first basic premise of any such conversation has to be like profits are the key.
Yeah.
Corporate social opportunity or responsibility or philanthropy, all of this is good talk, is sweet talk, but it does not last for long.
Yeah.
If the businesses are not able to create profits sooner than they know, they will be out of business, right? Businesses are in the business of making profits.
Yeah.
That's a simple fact, and it's not a hard fact. It's a good fact, right? Because when they make profits, there are a lot of good things that happen
Yeah.
around it.
Yeah.
So first things first, when I think about sustainability or ESG, I don't mix it with CSR.
Okay.
Right? CSR or social development is good, and sustainability is also good, but
Okay.
the two are different.
Okay.
And what I mean by sustainability is the literal word of the word sustainability, which is to say that if you're trying to do anything good, you have to do it in a way which can be sustained. अगर आप खुद ही नहीं profits create कर पाओगे, then how long will you last? Right? So that doesn't sustain. Even in the flights they tell you, right, you have to put your own air mask first before you start to help others.
Yeah.
Now helping others is that social responsibility part of it. Helping yourself is the sustainability part of it. You can help others only if you can sustain yourself. That's number one. Right? Now the question comes that why is it not in companies' interest or in companies' interest to be environmentally sound?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, can you create a business opportunity out of it? The answer is that you have to be creative. The business as usual traditional approaches might not do the trick. If you continue to operate the way you have been operating with the same kind of paradigm, with the same kind of fundamentals, with the same kind of constraints, with the same type of it's an OR problem, right? It's a simple problem where you have to maximize profits subject to some constraints. If you don't change that or tweak that, if you don't change the rules of the game, if you don't change the way you're thinking, if you don't change the enablers, then there is nothing different than that you're going to be able to do do about it. So let me give you an example. For example, there is a company, a shoemaking company, which is in the business of selling shoes. Now, that company is thinking about what can I do about the post-consumer shoe waste?
Yeah.
Because that's a big problem. That the post-consumer shoe waste has a lot of material, plastic, this, that goes into the landfill or into the oceans. Now, they were struggling with it. They had to actually create some kind of an ecosystem wherein they said that, yeah, this can be monetized. How? This is a waste for me. But this could be a raw material for somebody else, right? Whom could we position this to as a raw material? It's a waste for me because it's like it's the end of the consumer
circle,
right? So it's a post-consumer shoe waste. But if it's a post-consumer shoe waste, if I were to be able to aggregate all of this waste across, let's say, the whole of North America, start to put it back to a company which is, let's say, manufacturing yoga mats or something like a gym equipment which has a lot of plastic, rubber, those kind of foams and everything which can be derived from shoes, it becomes a monetizable asset, right? So that's the way to think about it. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes those creative solutions are easy or easy in the sense that at least there is a way to arrive at those. There are more tricky problems when you start to think about, let's say, emissions. There is a question mark, right? कि अब इसको emissions को कैसे monetize करना है? Maybe you might not be able to find that. But then you have to also remind yourself कि यार the choice is not between not monetizing and monetizing. The choices are actually very different. Because if the regulations are coming up and if there is going to be a taxation on let's say the emissions that you are emitting, you have heard of CBAM? It stands for Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism.
Okay.
It's a big thing that has come up in Europe, which is to say that anything that gets exported to Europe or any European company which is importing something, that product has some embedded carbon.
Yeah.
You know, because the product is coming from a different value chain, wherever it is coming from, the different
Yeah.
markets,
Yeah.
you know, the processes that have gone into it. There is some embedded carbon in it. You have to pay a tax on that,
Carbon tax.
carbon tax on that. Now, if that is a regulation that is coming through,
Hmm.
then you don't have an option.
Hmm.
So the options that you have are, one, thinking about how do you help your own partners who you are working with
Hmm.
manage their emissions, which is the scope 3 emission for you, or switch to a different a partner to work with.
Hmm.
Now you are not able to monetize those emissions in this case. But what I'm trying to say is that there is never an option of just continuing business as usual.
Hmm.
Because if the regulations around you are changing, you have to respond to that.
Hmm.
So not being able to monetize is not the end of the story. The story is that what options do I have after that? The options are that you continue as is, and in the process end up paying a lot of taxes, which anyways makes you less profitable,
Yeah.
or do something about it which can at least mitigate those things.
Hmm.
And when you look at those two options, then immediately taking the other option, which is to say that you do something to mitigate it, becomes the more profitable option.
Hmm.
Right? So to your question that it might not be profitable
Hmm.
is based on the assumption that the constraints or the rules of the game are not going to change, but they are changing as we speak. CBAM has come up, CSRD, it's a new reporting guideline that has come up in Europe. There are so many things. E-waste rules have come up in 2016, in 2019 in India. You know, EPR has come through. So these rules of the game are changing, and that will change the way you have to think about your business. And those changes will have to happen through either innovation, through some kind of creative solutions, through fundamentally different ways of conducting business. And the sooner the businesses realize it, the better it is, because if they don't, they will not be sustainable. And sustainable not in the sense that they're doing social good, but sustainable in the English
Existing.
literal sense of the word. They will not last. Businesses actually go down because there is so much inertia for change, and the way they have been operating is not going to last because the rules are changing. So
In this context, wonderful example one stated, and probably changes the way people think about. It's more of a problem solving approach, right? You think about what variables you can change, and not being continuing with the inertia. But keeping that in mind, if you could help me and all of us understand the more on the Indian context. We talked about carbon tax and carbon credits, but in the Indian context, we're not there yet,
yeah.
right? So in terms of say an industrial organization, or say a consumer goods organization, as you mentioned, which is a shoe manufacturing firm, what do the regulations look like today? If we could say broadly have us build an understanding on that, and yeah, just learning more on that. What is the status quo?
So see, regulations impact all industries in a very different way. So for example, if you were to think about, let's say, a heavy industries, kind of a capital intensive industry, for example, the kind of regulations that they have to deal with would be very different from what, let's say, a consumer goods company will have to deal with. Now, if you think about, let's say, oil and gas companies or these energy companies, for them, it's an existential crisis right now. You know, the kind of conventional power sources that they have been relying on, and the world moving towards, let's say, completely renewables, they have a question on their very existence. I mean, it's not even about the regulations coming up. It's really about, will there be demand for the kind of product that I'm producing? Because if everybody is committing to, let's say, becoming completely RE powered by 2030 or 2050, then what happens to those conventional sources of energy? So even if there are no explicit regulations, the consumer demand itself is going to drive the way you have to think about your business today.
Right.
You know, think about all these oil and gas companies, think about all these energy companies.
Right.
It's a huge question for them. And the challenge for them is that these are hard to abate sectors. And what you mean by that is that you need to put in capital intensive investments here for any kind of a shift that's going to happen. So for them, it's the most difficult challenge. And they have to overcome that inertia, think about new ways of working to be able to address this risk. The little less complicated situation is for some of these consumer goods companies as compared to energy companies, because here I think the regulations that they're coming up are more in the form of EPR commitments, which is to say that they have to take care of their product even after it leaves their own premises. there is a manufacturing company, you're doing some kind of work in your factory outlets, and then
Yeah.
it goes to the retail outlet, from where it goes to the consumer.
Yeah.
The EPR requirements basically mean extended producer responsibility, which is
Okay.
to say that even after it leaves your premises, you have to take the ownership of bringing it back.
Hmm.
Now, that's a very different challenge as compared to what we talked about for these oil and gas and energy companies, because in this case, you're talking about how do you start to extend your influence beyond your operations, which is to say, how do you partner with your downstream partners?
Hmm.
How do you, work with your customers and then the eventual consumers? And even after that, when the product ends, be it a garment or a cloth or an apparel or a shoe or whatever the consumer product is, how do you start to bring it back? Now, that's a different problem, reverse logistics problem it is, right? You think about these PET bottles, for example. PET bottles obviously are by itself, it has absolutely, not absolutely, but it has a very low value. It's a simple plastic PET bottle.
Yeah.
What would you do with it? It's not easy to collect it back. Invariably,
Throwing anywhere.
you kind of litter it away. It gets
Yeah.
collected by some of these kabadi walas and
Yeah.
informal sector. It finds its way to some facilities. But the point is that if you have to think about creating an ecosystem where you can actually monetize this and make it a sustainable model, you have to understand that this one PET bottle might have a very low value. It's a few cents. I'll not be quoting the number. It's a few cents. That's it for a particular PET bottle. If you were to aggregate on the number of PET bottles that you could potentially source in the Indian context or in any country's context, multiplied with that volume, it starts to become a sizable number.
Yeah.
Now, the question is that number is a notional number because you haven't solved the problem of collecting it. If you have to solve the problem of collecting it, you have to invest in reverse logistics. When you do that, then there is a question of what is that return that you're getting. Now, the point is that return cannot be realized just by yourself. That value that exists is something that exists across the supply chain, right? You have to figure out again a way of distributing that value across the supply chain, because if it is not, one of the partners in the supply chain will not work on it, and the chain will break down. So there is a company which did something very interesting on similar lines. I'll again not take the name of the company. What they did was they put some kind of a barcode on the PET bottles, and they also created an app wherein a consumer could just put it back into a smart bin. Right? It's in the European context. So what you do is you scan that barcode on the PET bottle. That is easy, right? I mean, it hardly takes a few seconds.
Yeah.
So before you put it back into the litter, into the bin, just scan it, put it into the bin. There is something in that smart bin which connects it to your app. So the point being that PET bottle has been pushed back into the value chain. It had some value. Some fraction of that value will accrue to you as a consumer, right?
Surely.
Then the company which has created that network of smart bins is a waste management company. It is actually getting that value for multiple bottles because all the consumers will do that, right?
Yeah.
So some part of that value which was realizable through those bottles is going to accrue to you as a waste management company, as a company which is investing in those smart bins network.
Yeah.
Some part of that value will have to accrue to the plastic manufacturer which created that bottle, which is more of the manufacturer, right? The moment you create an ecosystem like that, wherein that realizable value, which is the number of bottles multiplied by the value of one bottle, gets distributed across the various partners in a way which is investable, which is sustainable, which is doable, it starts to unlock that value. So if you ask me to summarize in a nutshell, I think the key point is that you have to think beyond the usual ways of working, and when you're doing that, think value chain. Don't think organizational context. Think the value chain context, because that value has to accrue to every partner in some shape and form. The way you distribute that value will determine whether it is going to last or not. So, and that requires a lot of innovation, a lot of creativity. There are no easy answers here, and that's where we come in as consultants.
That's why you're in business, because there are no easy answers.
Yeah, even we are finding answers, by the way. There are no easy answers here. We work with them to find answers.
Sure, wonderful. And how would a typical consulting engagement flow in this context? That there's of course there will be both a pull and a push. You would be out there selling and creating business for the firm, or there's direct demand also for players like Accenture you're working with. And so how does it say initiate, and how does it flow?
So if you were to ask about how the business generation happens, a lot of work happens to be repeat business.
Okay.
Which is to say that we already have established relationships with a lot of companies, and we continue to work with them because these are trusted partnerships we have created over time. So it's not like you have to respond to a proposal and there is an RFP, proposal response. Of course, that is also a route through which business comes, but a lot of actual repeat business is what really sustains. That is number one. I think the other thing is that when you are trying to create a business, invariably, especially if you were to think about the sustainability consulting part of it, the first key question is exactly what we talked about, that what is a business case? For them to invest in any initiative, you need to be able to demonstrate that there is a business case, because then they have their own capital allocation process, and there has to be a business case demonstrated in terms of NPVs, IRRs, returns, this, that. You have to create that. So a lot of times what happens is that a typical getting started kind of an engagement would look like a strategy assignment, which is to say that you would work for about 10 to 12 weeks, in which you will have to do a lot of data crunching, analytics, and thinking, and sometimes even brainstorming or design thinking workshops to come up with those ideas, to create a business case around that, collect data, figure out investments required, returns generated, all of that. And once you have demonstrated that, that would lead to the next phase of work, which is where you start to actually do some kind of implementation or execution. So, upfront strategy work, let's say about 8 to 10 weeks, analytics, business case, followed by what could really be something like a 6 months to even multi-year engagement, which is where you start to implement on the ground. That's the kind of typical life cycle we have. As a strategy and sustainability professional, my team's work tends to be more in the areas of that upfront business casing, analytics, and all of that kind of stuff, more as compared to the actual long-term implementation of the work.
Got it. Then that must be further divided, and essentially your forte being to help create that value.
Yeah.
Right. To be precise, and then
create se bhi pehle identify. Right. Even before you create, you have to identify the avenues of value creation.
Right.
Which is where these workshops, design thinking workshops, for example, come into play. Because as we discussed, there are no easy solutions. Had it been easy, they would have identified by now. These businesses are doing their stuff for several decades, right? But there are no easy answers as we see that shift. So first, identify that value, then quantify that value, and then think about what is it that needs to happen to really capture this value. And that is where the conversation starts in terms of, do you need to build new skills? Do you need to acquire new skills? Do you need to invest in new technology? Do you need to work with some partnerships? Do you need to build some infrastructure? So that enablement and actual execution starts a few steps after. A lot of people tend to believe that the consulting companies will come in and they will do this. But there is a life that it takes before it reaches there. So that to me is the more tricky part. Because once you have identified, then it's operation, in the sense that you just need to work with the right players to make it work. But पहले answer पता होना चाहिए कि करना क्या चाहते हो. That is where strategy consulting comes into play.
And sounds very interesting. That you were again given 6-8 weeks हो गया या थोड़ा longer भी period है initially आपका वो ideate करने का और वो identify करने का, फिर वो further on उसको execute किया जाता है. But working with clients across the globe, across industries sounds very interesting. I mean, there's a new business problem for you to solve. It's like being in a business school, right? Where you're solving case studies and working on that. So I know that you love what you're doing, but how did that decision of being a consultant came across post MBA? Because were you thinking on the same lines as I'm mentioning, or how has that come up? And did you at some point in time maybe ponder building a business of your own, maybe?
So I think that choice comes naturally to you.
Okay.
You have to figure out what excites you.
Yeah.
Right. So for example, in my case, I used to have that knack for problem solving. Confronted with any new problem, I like to come up with ideas. I like to structure it, decompose it, think of it like smaller modules to deal with, which then come together as a jigsaw puzzle to solve the whole problem. And in the consulting parlance, we still call it IBPS, issue-based problem solving.
Okay.
You would have heard about these MISI components, right? That there is a decomposition of a bigger problem into mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive components.
Yeah.
MISI. Yeah. Right. And the point is that you structure it in a way that where those components become easier to address. And once you have addressed those smaller problems, you bring it all together. So I always had a knack for that kind of problem solving. I mean, and I very strongly believe that this kind of problem solving applies to everything, not just business problems or client problems. To any problem. You're facing some relationships problem, you can actually apply MISI. You're facing that problem that I was facing, that my running mileage was not going beyond 800 meters. You can actually apply MISI. I mean, I actually applied the skill of actually decomposing that problem. And I'll tell you, I mean, I'll maybe take a minute to tell you how I did that.
Sure.
You know, one fine evening, I sat down and I started asking myself that, you see, this mileage is not improving. I'm stuck at 800 meters. So then I told myself, ki, why don't I approach it with IBPS, issue-based problem solving, which we do for any of our client problems. My first question to myself was that, what am I doing to train? My answer was that I run, then I run a little more, and then I run a little more. You know, so that was not helping it. So I said that let's decompose it. I said if I'm running, it's really what I care for is for a long distance run, I care for the mileage, meters or kilometers, right? How can I decompose that? I said let's decompose that by saying there is meters per step, which is to say how much distance can I cover in one step. There is steps per minute, which is to say how many steps can I take every minute. And then there are minutes, which is to say how long can I continue. The moment you do that, that mileage problem becomes a smaller set of three problems. Your meters per step is your cadence, or not cadence, is your stride length. How much can you open your legs when you're jumping, right? When you're stepping. So that is something that you need to work on your flexibility. If your legs are more flexible, you can actually take longer strides.
Leaps.
It opens up bigger. Steps per minute, the next component, is really about cadence. If you have to improve that, you have to do a lot of cardio workouts, right? So think about the jumping jacks and the burpees, which make you jump around. The more agile you are, the better it is for you to be able to improve your cadence. You can take more steps per minute. And when you think about running the minutes, which is to say how long can you sustain that, that is where your strength comes into play. A lot of people actually don't know that for becoming a better runner, you need to have good strength also. They actually completely ignore the strength part of it. But if you don't have strength, then what I was telling you, even your earlobes start paining when you're running a marathon. The moment I did that, I realized that there are three distinct things that need to be working on. There is flexibility, there is cardio, and there is strength. And then each of those can be further decomposed as well. The moment you do that, there is a lot of joy that you have decomposed a seemingly humongous problem of running a marathon into such smaller components which are easier to address. And then you further decompose it. So you, in the process, you build an issue tree and then deal with it each one of separately. And at all points, you know exactly where am I lacking, because at the end of the day, the chain is as strong as the weakest link in it. So basically, you have decomposed a big problem into a set of smaller links in the chain. And then you have a way of tackling each link separately. So again, I mean, I diverted a little bit, but the point was to answer the question around what prompted you to get into consulting. I think it was that joy of problem solving which pulled me in this direction.
I think you did well to go there, because it fairly explains your interest to say solve problems in that sense. And from this insight, there's something I usually tend to, when I look at my career as a professional, I heard someone say that your career is amalgamation of short projects that you do. So that could typically mean that there is a good project that you're interested by, right? Maybe a good opportunity, right, with some firm which you would like to explore. But in the longer run, you don't necessarily feel कि क्या मेरे को इसी में career बनाना है या नहीं बनाना, but at the moment it does sound interesting. At that point in time, given your experience of advising people as well, people who are in B schools, what approach do you think should people have when say taking important career decisions? And this is of significance to ask you, because you've been someone who's been with a firm from the start, right? Which is very interesting and very rare as well, because the normal loop goes that you switch to a higher pay and then you move somewhere else, and that cycle continues, is the way a significant amount of people think, right? So from that context where you're coming from, and coming from an experience of advising and speaking at B schools and in conferences as well, again a perspective at say taking important career decisions or evaluating that.
So see, I'll say two things on this. One, I think a lot of people tend to overplay the importance of good projects. There is, in my opinion, no such thing as good project or bad project.
Okay.
There is only the ability for an individual to see through what it has to offer to you and not being able to see what it has offered to you. And I'll tell you an example. So when I was a young analyst, I ended up with a project wherein I was supposed to be making some transcripts for some interviews which were done.
Okay.
And I asked myself, yeah, what is this that I'm doing? I'm listening to the interviews and just typing it down, and then obviously I can't type it at the speed at which that the actual
speaking.
conversation goes. So I have to play it back, and then again I do that, and I do that again, and then I do that again. 3-4 months project. This is all I was supposed to do. Prima facie, a bad project, right? Prima facie, a bad project. But I was fortunate enough to realize that actually it's not a bad project. It's my inability to see what that project has to offer. First things first, somebody is paying for that project, so it is some value for someone.
Yeah.
So उसके लिए अगर value है तो कुछ तो है उसमें. Second, what's in it for you? Sometimes it's your inability, as I said. For me, I think I realized that I became such a better listener after having done that project because my concentration power, my ability to actually absorb what I'm listening increased significantly. Not incrementally, but significantly. So what might have been like a bad project where a lot of people might have considered actually quitting and getting into a different, good, fancy project, I feel like in hindsight, if I had not done that project, I would not have become a better listener, which again I believe is a big leadership trait. If you can listen well, you can actually understand the people much better. A lot of times we make the mistake of speaking more than what we listen. मेरे को लगता है मैंने ये चीज़ उस project में सीखी थी, which was probably, based on the usual frameworks, the worst project in terms of being attractive and interesting and all that. But बहुत सीखा था यार. Sometimes you end up on a project, and अब तो शायद इतना नहीं होता, but analyst days में होता था, where a lot of focus will go on building quality presentations and all that kind of fancy stuff. I realized that attention to detail increased exponentially.
Sure.
Every comma, every word has a meaning.
Yeah.
You remember, how will you remember? Once I was actually creating a PowerPoint deliverable. Again, I'll not take the name of the client, but I was a young analyst fresh out of campus. I had written a tagline in one of the slides which said that focusing on cost reduction is important for this client because of XYZ reasons. Something like that I had written. And my managing director at that time, my partner, actually took a big class for me that this tagline makes no sense. And I asked him why. So he says that focusing on cost reduction will not make the client get the profits. Only cost reduction will do. Why are you using stupid words which have no value? So cut that focusing on. Just talk about cost reduction is important for the client. So such a small point. But you realize that it actually sharpens you. It makes sure that your speech, your choice of words becomes far more measured. Which again I think is such an important skill, because at the end of the day, words is all you have to convey your feelings or your messages or your whatever you have to communicate.
Yeah.
If you can't do that well, then probably you will struggle. Now, what might have been like a project wherein I was supposed to be doing formatting and wordsmithing and all, turned out to be a project where I actually became such polished in terms of attention to detail. Abhi, आज की date में, even if I observe something in the captions on a news channel, if there is a comma missing, I will notice that.
Yeah.
And me and my wife have a good laugh about it, that this is what consulting world has done to us. But the point is that it's a good skill to have. It's okay to do that in these kind of language oriented things, but that attention to detail actually stays with you on everything. You observe minutest of things when you are working with people. You observe minutest of nuances with respect to people's expressions, their body language. These are all cues, and you have to train your mind to be able to catch those. A lot of these non-fancy projects have taught me that. So coming back to your question, I think I feel like, as I said, there are no good projects or bad projects, but just the inability or ability to see through what it has to offer to you. If you are not able to see it, ask yourself, maybe few years down the line you will understand. In hindsight, I feel like I have never done a bad project. All the projects that God has blessed me with have taught me something. Listening skills, attention to detail skills, analytical skills, communication skills, everything has taught me something. Every single thing teaches you something. So never ever have that mindset. A lot of people I've seen, they will start to question, यार मैं तो MBA करके आया हूँ, IIT engineering करके आया हूँ, यार is this the best use of my time? Don't overplay your skills so much that it becomes your own hindrance. You have something to learn, embrace it. So that's number one. Second, to your point about changing jobs, I think as humans, again, we want instant gratification.
Yeah.
And I hate that. I am somebody who loves perseverance, who would want to play the longer game, because I feel like these small incremental benefits actually accrue over time. So to your point, has it ever occurred to me to change a job or start something new? Actually not. It has never even occurred to me. And I say that with a lot of pride. You know, maybe God has been kind enough to give me a job which has never
That's right.
pushed me in that direction where I have had to think about changing. But 2007 to 2024, 17 years, and that thought has never occurred to me. So I don't know if it is a blessing or if it is something to do with me or if it is something to do with the firm that I work with. But yeah, maybe I won't be able to comment on why people do that.
Sure.
Maybe my suspect is that it's about instant gratification. Sometimes when you see that somebody is getting a 25% or a 30 or a 40% hike, it makes financial sense. Maybe it does. Financially, it does make that sense in the short term. But having lived a career that long, I feel like in the long run, those who had moved out, let's say a decade or a half a decade back, are not necessarily ahead of me. So I don't know.
Makes sense. And it also speaks a lot about the firm you're working with, that means that, you know, people working there are, of course not to generalize, but says good about the firm that you work with, that you've been the firm has been kind enough and you've been diligent enough to, you know, keep working hard, and there have been opportunities coming at you to succeed and do that. And as you earlier mentioned, there's no good or bad project. So as Steve Jobs says, that dots only join backwards. So whatever you're doing, try to identify what learning it holds for you, because as you said, it sure does. Right. And I think just as we head towards the end of the conversation, I would be happy to understand from you, since you're, you know, now leading as a, you know, managing director also. You've been leading teams, of course, as you know, grow up the corporate ladder, as we call. What would be some leadership traits that you feel go a long way for people who are trying to imbibe that, or are on that journeys of, you know, becoming leaders, wanting to become leaders? Because you're at in a professional stage, that a position where a lot of people desire to be, right? So what do you think has worked well for you in terms of maybe some qualities or some leadership traits that you've built upon, and how do you, as an individual who wants to do that, imbibe that mindfully?
So that's a difficult one, but I'll try to answer things which I value the most in any leader.
Sure.
I think as leaders, we sometimes try to overplay our successes. And that, in my opinion, is not a good thing.
Okay.
I think as humans, we are all vulnerable. And when you are trying to inspire people or you know, lead people, they want to know more about your vulnerabilities. If you keep beating your own trumpet that I did this, I did that, I was a successful person, it actually creates more insecurity in their minds that will I be able to do that? But what they need to know is not about how you succeeded, but where did you fall? And how did you cope with that? In fact, this book that you're holding right in your hands is actually about that. So my son is turning 14 this year, this month, April. And I wanted to see him, show him my vulnerable side. So you know, he has a perception that my dad went to an IIT and then an IIM and then he became a runner and then he, you know, became a managing director. So all of that is good. But I want him to know that this is not what defines me. These are some of the things which just happened in my life. What defines me is in this book. So when I was preparing for my IIT exam, you know, my parents had asked me to join FITGI. And I was somebody who was like a very non-serious, non-studious person at that point in time. And what I did was I bunked my classes for about 3 months. I did not show up at the class. I would leave the home. I would go somewhere, play, and come back in the evening. And that was the vulnerable side of me. I want him to know that as he's entering that phase of his life, I want him to know that aisa bhi hota hai. You know, you will get distracted. It's human. It's okay. But then I think what is important is that when you realize that mistake, you raise your hand and you say that I made a mistake. Don't make the second mistake of trying to hide it. So to your point, I think the first trait that I value in leaders is to be able to open up and show their vulnerable side. You know, talk about where they failed, where they wept at times. I have dropped a few tears at a few places in my life, and I never shy away from telling my youngsters, my teammates, that this is where I actually broke down. This is a presentation where I actually struggled quite a lot. This is a project where I actually did as bad as I could. You know, this is the moment of my life where I was like contemplating quitting it midway. I want them to know all of those things because that is what shaped me. You know, what I stand for is more based on those foundational and more profound experiences as compared to saying that I became this, I became that. So that's number one. Second, I think we always make a classic error of speaking much more than what we hear or what we listen. I think that again to me is important. I would be rather the last person to speak in the room and be very comfortable with it. I usually don't face a FOMO when I'm sitting in a room to feel like pressured or obliged to speak. I'll probably always be the last person to speak in the room. And I feel like a lot of leaders don't necessarily embrace that or are not very comfortable with that. If it has happened in a meeting that they haven't spoken for a while, they start to actually get jittery. That's what I've seen. So being comfortable under your skin with what you are, who you are, not trying to have that kind of a fear of missing out, happy and peaceful with your vulnerabilities. I think these to me are the skills or the traits that a good leader has usually. And if you can do that, then probably more people will connect to you as compared to being that extrovert who speaks and who opens up and who's always the first one on the room and who's always talking about his successes. Those are, natural fallouts of some of these traits, in my opinion.
Nice. So the point goes to convey that essentially be as vocal as you can about not just your successes, that is also important, but also about places
kahan
where you
gire,
struggled.
what you went through, how did you actually bounce back? Those are some of the things which actually inspire people. I mean, I just look at my own people who have inspired me. Sachin Tendulkar is somebody who has really inspired me in a big way. As much as I love to talk about the fact that he made so many hundreds or whatnot, I love to talk more about the fact that in his very first tour, he was thinking about the fact that he does not belong here. He was hit on his nose by the ball and he was like contemplating that, is this the last match? Yeah, Waqar, I guess. Waqar, Yunus. I mean, the point being that he talks about his vulnerabilities. So मेरे को उससे ज़्यादा inspiration मिलती है. I don't get inspired by the fact that he scored 100 hundreds, but I get inspired by the fact that he went through such lows in his career when everything was going bad in terms of injuries and whatnot. And maybe that's just one very small example or maybe one big example. But the point I'm trying to convey is कि I ask myself कि what is inspiring me? Are his statistics inspiring me, or is that low of his life where he actually bounced back inspiring me? You love to hear about every human being as a crazy ball. You have seen those crazy balls. The harder you throw me on the ground, the higher I will rise. I rather talk about that than talk about the height at which that crazy ball ended. Right? So that to me is the biggest trait a leader should be able to exude.
That's something that I've heard heard so clearly for the first time, and I take that away as a unique learning. Hope people also do that. And as we talked about the book, I've also recently started to read this. I was on a different book first. So this is the book called Chasing the Horizon, and as you mentioned in the book, being Aman and loving Sachin Tendulkar, having his poster, I was of course there's a lot of praise for the book, and I will complete reading this, because from whatever little that I've read is very, of course, inspiring, and as I sit across the table, I understand why. And one thing that I was curious about, doesn't probably on a fun side, how did you end up remembering in so much detail on what date what happened? Because I was very curious, because almost every the way the flow is that it's just memories and days and then deriving learnings out of it, right? So I mean, that's not the first thing that probably I should take away from the book, but that as a question struck me, that if I think about, say I am writing a book about myself, right, 15 years later, will I remember certain nitty-gritties in so much detail? I don't have an answer. So
and this is not the first time I'm being asked this question, that how did you actually manage to bring out that level of detail? And honestly, I'm 41 years old, and I don't think I remember that level of detail for the whole 41 years of my life, or whatever, after 6 or 7 kind of my life. It's only those 2 years for which I remember these things in as much detail. And it's also a reflection of the fact that how intense those 2 years were for me. Sometimes when you get connected to something so intensely or so closely, it has a bigger impact on your mindset, on your psyche.
Yeah.
I think those 2 years had that kind of an impact on me. अभी अगर आप मेरे को पूछोगे कि पिछले 10 दिन में क्या हुआ है, probably I'll struggle to answer that. But if you ask me कि when you were doing your maths का IIT JEE का paper, which question were you attempting at what point in time in those 2 hours that you had, I'll probably be able to answer that as well. So I think it just goes to show how connected I became after I realized the mistake I was doing of having bunked those classes. And I don't know if you have read it. Basically, when you do that kind of a mistake, you obviously start to show up in your results. It starts to show up.
Yeah.
So I had scored 2 marks in one of my exams out of 25. And as luck would have it, there was a totaling mistake in that. It actually totaled up to 2.5. Now that's as bad as 2, right? But the idiot that I was, I went back to my teacher and I said, "कि यार ये आप totaling mistake ठीक करो." She was furious. She tore the sheet. And that moment is so real and so alive in my mindset right now that I can actually, if I close my eyes, I'll see it in front of me right here. That young Sandeep or whatever, Aman in this case, and the madam that I was speaking with, it's actually vivid in my mindset. And that to me was like, as I have called it, my prized possession, which I kept for at least 2 years till I actually corrected that. And the teacher actually had to correct those 2 to 2.5 at the end of 2 years when it did not even matter anymore. So I guess to your point, it's just about how intensely have you lived that part of your life, which just creates an indelible impression on your mindset. उसके आगे का मेरे से पूछोगे कि उसके बाद when you went to the college, if you can even describe which courses you took, nothing. मतलब things have faded out. ये नहीं fade हुआ. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to write about it. So
if you could just sum the conversation up with what struck you into writing that book. I know a little about that experience, what made you write about it, but if just as an end to this conversation you could bring that out.
So the decision to write the book actually happened over a marathon. So I was running a marathon. I was 37 years old then. And I did something very unique that day. I said that 42 kilometers is what I have to run. Similar to my age. So at every kilometer, I'm going to think about what my life used to be at that age. So for example, when I'm running the 13th kilometer, I'll vaguely try to remember what was happening in my life when I was 13 years old. I think the 16th and 17th year of my life is where I actually wept while I was running in the marathon. I saw it in the pictures. I was actually having tears in my eyes when I was running those, because this is all that I was thinking about. So when I reached the 27th kilometer, when I reached my age, I did not have anything to think about the remaining 5 kilometers because I had not lived that life. So those 5 kilometers is when I decided that I'm going to write about the moments which I felt most passionately about and most intensely about. So those were those 2 years. And then obviously, when I think about the current context, as I said, my son is now pretty much the age where I was living that life. I want him to understand that life is not easy. Life is going to bring its own fair share of downs, more downs than ups at times. It's okay. And you don't need to worry about it. We will stand by you. Even if you're wrong, I will stand by you. So again, there is an incident which again is something which has had an indelible impression on my mind. So I slept in one of my classes and my teacher called my father to complain that your son sleeps in the class just 1 month before the board examination. If he's sleeping, how do I help him? You know what my father responded to him? He said, after a little bit of pause, he said that the next time you see him sleeping, please don't wake him up. That's the response he gave to my teacher. And it is so fresh and real in my mind. I can remember those timid impressions that my professor was giving back to my father. He was like, what is wrong with you? And my father responded that if he's sleeping, it's not like he's deriving joy out of that sleep. It's because he's struggling. He is sleep deprived. It means that he is waking up till 4 a.m. in the morning and he's trying to do something. अब वो बेचारा struggle कर रहा है, उसको आप उठा के क्या पढ़ाओगे? Just let him sleep. That's all the help I need from you. Wow. So I want to give that same comfort to my son. कि अगर तू गलती भी कर रहा है ना, I will stand by you. As long as you are able to say कि यार मैं कोशिश करके उसको ठीक करूँगा. हो सकता है वो कोशिश कामयाब हो सकता है वो कोशिश नाकामयाब हो. It is okay. As long as you give me the comfort that you will genuinely make an attempt and you will face the music when it matters, I am with you. उसके बाद अगर नहीं हुआ तो नहीं हुआ. It doesn't matter. But be honest to yourself. That's all. So I mean that's where the thought came about writing the book, and yeah, my son loves it. He has read it at least 7-8 times now.
Oh wow. Wow. That must be so, again, heartening for you.
It is.
And the point that he's doesn't make objective reason to read a book say more than twice or thrice, but given he's done that,
he has
6
done
to
that.
7 times, that
He has read every incident and he has asked me very curiously that what was going through your mind when you said this.
Hmm.
So I know he actually got inside it. He can almost talk about those 2 years as if I can talk about it.
Nice.
You know, just the way I would talk about it.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean it's a nice little relationship, and I have a very different relationship with my son.
Hmm.
It's more like a friend than a father-son duo.
Hmm.
So I'm loving it.
I'm glad, and that's the way it should be. On that note, I thank you so much, Mr. Sandeep, to be here, spending out your time, planning, giving us the certain hours within your planned day. It has been an honor. And
It's
just
important
before
for
we
me.
end this, if there's a although a lot of messages have been already given out, if there's a certain ending message that you'd like to give people who've watched us till here.
I think just one message that I want to give is that life is actually very simple.
Hmm.
Keep it simple. Keep it the way it was supposed to be. Don't complicate things. Have fun along the way. Be honest. Be very uncomplicated in your thinking,
Hmm.
and let the rest take care of itself.
Hmm.
Don't think beyond what you need to.
Hmm.
Just live it as um, bindas as you can, if I can use that word.
Surely you can. Chalo, on that note, people, thank you so much for watching, tuning in, listening. This is very insightful for me, and hope it was the same for you as well. And yeah, if you've been till here, we'll be happy if you could comment something that you liked, or maybe even subscribe to be noted of whatever future conversations we bring in. And yes, thank you so much for watching.